Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. We can go ahead and take down this first poll. My name is Sam and I work for Clark Conservation District. I am joined tonight by my co-host Ashley Smithers, who also works for Clark CD. I am joined by, I am also joined by Terry Coper from WSU's Small Acreage Program and our main presenter, Alayne Blickle from Horses for Clean Water. We will get to our main presentation soon, but we have some additional informational slides to go through first. Okay, here we go. As a reminder, this is a 3-part webinar series focusing on mud and manure, pasture management, and water quality. Tonight is the first of the 3, but we hope to see you all at the next 2, taking place on May 12th and May 19th, beginning at 6 p.m. If you have yet to register for the others, please be sure to sign up on our website. Next slide. Clark Conservation District is a non-regulatory agency that works with residents of Clark County, providing technical assistance to encourage good stewardship of our environment, as well as putting on several workshops and webinars like this one. To check out some of our past webinars, head to our webpage at clarkcd.org. While there, you can sign up for our newsletter to learn about upcoming webinars and district events. Next slide. Poop Smart Clark is a new program that is aiming to reduce poop in our surface waters. Through partnership with various organizations, Clark CD can provide technical and financial assistance to eligible landowners to install best management practices. If you have too much animal poop or are curious if you are eligible for assistance, feel free to reach me at sfrendel@clarkcd.org. I will be putting our emails in the chat box as well. Next slide.
Hi, my name is Ashley Smithers, and I'll be working with Sam to conduct the mini site visits to help you cover your manure piles with those tarps. Throughout this series, you will learn the importance of covering your manure piles, and so you guys can all look forward to that. These mini site visits are aimed to be about 15 minutes, so pretty short, but they are a great opportunity to meet with Clark CD staff, namely Sam and I. Learn how to cover your manure pile. We'll help you do it. And also the best part is that you're going to learn all about additional resources available to you. And then if you want to meet with us longer, you'll have an opportunity to sign up for a longer site visit. So finally, I think they're a really awesome opportunity to see if you're really a good candidate for our Poop Smart program and then be able to enroll in that program. So next slide. So here's how you can reach us. Visit our website if you'd like to sign up for one of those mini site visits. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Sam and I. So next up, I have Terry Coper, and they will be presenting about the WSU Small Acreage Program. And all the opportunities that they have there. So Alayne, you can move to the next slide, and Terry, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Terry Coper. I'm the Small Acreage Program Coordinator at WSU Clark County Extension. And we do our programming in partnership with the Clark County Clean Water Program. Next. So our mission is to provide small acreage land stewards with knowledge, skills, and resources necessary to manage your land and animals in ways that keep the water clean and protect natural resources. Next. And we offer a whole lot of educational events throughout the year. We just recently wrapped up our Small Acreage Expo, which was a day-long event full of educational workshops. Next. I'll tell you about a few more of them. So throughout the year, we offer well and septic inspection workshops, and this is a great opportunity for homeowners that have a gravity-fed septic system to get certified to do your own self-inspection, which you can do every other time. And it's also a great way to just learn about well and septic system maintenance and how to keep it all healthy for your family. Next. So in the fall, we offer a class series called Living on the Land. This is offered once a week in the evenings, and it goes over topics such as weed management and improving soil health, and a great way to connect in with your other folks in the county and network. Next. Also in January, we offer another class series called Ag Entrepreneurship and Business Planning. And this will give ag entrepreneurs an opportunity to develop your own business plan and hear from local experts, and also meet other people in the county that are doing similar endeavors and network. All right, next. The third Saturday in September, we offer the Harvest Celebration, which is generally 10 farms opening up their gates and giving tours of their farm. They often will be selling produce as well and having other fun events. Hopefully this can take place this year. Next. And if you feel like you're doing good job as a land steward, particularly keeping the water clean in the county, and are interested, we have a recognition program. What it entails is me coming out to do a site visit assessment, and then you could get this nice metal sign and hang on your gate. And so then your neighbors know you're a good person to come talk to about land stewardship. Next. So if you're interested in that program or would like to be notified about any of our upcoming educational events, just reach out to me at terry.coper@wsu.edu or visit our website. And I just wanted to thank Clark Conservation District for having us out to talk about our program. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and a good workshop.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will move on to our main presentation. Alayne, while you're bringing that up, I will just give your introduction, okay?
Okay.
All right. Alayne Blickle is an accomplished horsewoman and educator who works with horse and small acreage livestock owners, teaching horsekeeping and land management practices. Her undergraduate studies were in psychology and natural sciences, and she has a graduate degree in communications. She keeps her training current in the areas of sustainable agronomy, natural resource management, rangeland ecology, soil health, and equine science. She has been a pioneer in the field of horsekeeping and land management. In the mid-90s, she created her own consulting business, Horses for Clean Water, which she continues today through her work partnering with natural resource agencies and horse organizations. All right, Alayne, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Samantha. And do we have the results of that poll that were up, that was up a few minutes ago? All right, great. So when we meet in person, I love to find out a little bit more about all of you. And since we're not in person, these polls are a nice way to for me to do that. So most of you live in Clark County, and a few are outside of Clark County, and a few are even outside of Washington State. And there's like no right or wrong answers. It's just helpful for, oh, wow, look at that. 50% own horses and 50 don't. Some have cattle and llamas or alpacas and chickens, and some just own horses, about half do. Okay, that's great. I'll close it. So what I'll do is introduce myself a little bit at first. And I have a different background than what you usually see working in the equine field. So I like to share that with people because I hope that maybe, well, it helps you understand my credentials and my background, but also always hope that it might inspire some other people and young adults maybe to jump into this field. So my undergraduate degree is in psychology, and then my graduate degree is in communications. And I've been doing this work of working with horse owners and land management for about 30 years. I'm a horse person, like I'm sure many of you are as well, many of you horse owners. And I have been in horses since I was little, like in 5th grade, which was a really long time ago. And I'm fortunate enough that to have a husband who's totally into horses as well, and he's a trainer and a clinician and a judge, and we both compete in reining and ranch riding and ranch trail, and we both manage our place together. We've had 3 different horse places over the years, and where we are now in southwestern Idaho is this is a picture of it right here. And I like to just mention a little bit about it to provide ideas and food for thought for people, because we have, well, I think that it's a good idea, or it should be encouraged for people to look at ways of making money with their land. And I like to encourage people to think about making money with their land, highlighting environmentally sensitive land management practices. And that's what we do at our place, Sweet Pepper Ranch in Idaho. So let me just show you a little bit about that. So we have a horse motel, which is basically for, it's a place where people can stop overnight while they're traveling with their horse. We also do boarding and short-term boarding for like people who are going on vacation. Oh, oops, let's go next one. We have a bed and breakfast, but with COVID, we haven't used the indoor part of that. But we do have a glamping tent, which we had built a couple of years back, and it's been quite popular during the pandemic, and it's really a sweet little setup. You can see my dog Major sitting there and my horse Stellar in the background, so you can come with your horse and have it stay next door to you. We also do cowgirl retreats, and Matt teaches lessons and has clinics. And all of these things are centered around environmentally sensitive horse keeping practices. So ways that you can serve the natural resources and take that at heart for your management practices. So my business is, my day job is Horses for Clean Water. And what that is about classes and farm tours, virtual ones during a pandemic, developing educational materials. Like I was telling Samantha in 2006, which was a long time ago now, I had a contract with Clark County, and we developed a manual for horse and land management all that long time ago. So we do different materials like that and tip sheets that we do for different agencies. And I do individual consultations as well. And it's all about ways to conserve natural resources while taking care of horses or livestock. And the clean water part in our title has to do with the fact that runoff from muddy properties, muddy livestock properties, or from overgrazed pastures, or from mismanaged manure piles, like any of these 4 pictures here, the runoff from those can cause problems. So the runoff can get into the surface water and cause problems for aquatic life, or the runoff can even seep into the groundwater and can potentially contaminate our drinking water, so it can cause human health issues as well. So all the bottom line for everything that we're teaching is about reducing what we call non-point pollution. So we're looking at ways to prevent those bad practices from happening, and to improve our horse keeping skills and our land as well. So Horses for Clean Water is all about ways to take care of your animals and your land. So everything's going to be in concert. So you have good livestock health, you have chore efficiency, you have productivity, more productive pastures, the aesthetics of your place is improved. It's going to save you money because you have less things like vet bills. And it's also good for environmental health as well. So let's jump into our talk tonight. And I think I have a second poll that Ashley or Samantha can pull up. Yeah, okay. So if you guys want to go ahead and fill this out, this is going to give me a little bit more idea about your experience with some of the practices that I'm going to talk about. And it'll help me to gauge how I talk about these things going forward. So go ahead and take a minute or two to go through this, please. And then when it looks like most everybody has filled this out, you guys can put the results up there. And I also wanted to say, as we go along tonight, everyone, feel free to write down your questions in the Q&A box. And then at the end, we will get all of your questions. That's where I think you want them, right? Samantha, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the Q&A box, everybody can write their questions down and then we'll get them at the end. So if you guys have the results on that, if you can pop them up on the screen, I'll go ahead with that.
There's a couple more people, so I'll give you like
Okay.
20 more seconds to get your vote in.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start talking about this slide a little bit. So what we're going to talk about tonight is different ways to manage manure on livestock properties. And what we have in this slide are the two polar opposites. So on the top is a horse property with no manure management. And it's typical, I would say, of what we used to see in the old days. And so the manure and the stalls were cleaned and they just dumped it in a big pile in the back of the property without much thought to how they were going to deal with that. And so what happens then in that situation or in those kinds of situations is that the pile becomes huge, out of control, and then it, for different reasons, it might become inaccessible. In this case, for most of the year, the ground was too soft to drive any equipment back there. And as you can imagine, it's an eyesore. There's going to be odors and runoff from that. And this is Western Washington in this picture. And you can't tell, but there's houses all the way around. You can't tell because the trees are providing a barrier. So there was really no way to deal with that. And it was no fun to clean those stalls for those people, I'm sure. Whereas in the bottom place, which is a different place, they have a 3-bin composting system, which is very chore efficient because it's in the middle of their confinement area. So it's very easy to clean the stalls and paddocks and get it into the compost. And then it's very easy to get the finished compost out and spread it on the pasture. And so there's not going to be flies and odors or runoff because flies and odors are associated with fresh manure and not with the composting process. So that's what we're going to be gearing towards, is the bottom picture. And so let's see. The results of the poll is that most people already do some type of composting. That's awesome. And no worries if you don't, because we'll be talking about how to compost. And most people do use bedding. That's good to know for me. And it's almost 50-50 as far as whether people are looking for offsite options, like ways to deal with too much manure on their place. Okay, great. So I'll close that and we'll go ahead to our next slide. So this is, if we were in person, I would be asking you guys, how much manure do you think a horse produces in one day? And usually somebody says too much or a lot, but the answer is 50 pounds approximately for one horse for one day. And in 1 year, one horse produces about 8 tons. So we have 7 horses of our own, and that's many tons of manure. Plus we'd have a boarding facility, so there's about 15 horses here. So it adds up. And my suggestion is, before you go into these kinds of businesses and operations, is to have a plan of what you're going to do with that 8 tons of manure per year per horse. So here's for other livestock. For those of you who have cattle or other livestock, they produce more manure than horses, actually. Cattle and dairy cows do. Pigs, and then chickens. So the way that is it's 1,000 pounds of pigs or 1,000 pounds of chickens. So it's in comparison. So when we have animals and we have manure and stall waste, if we don't have a plan for what we're going to do with it, this is again, in the old days, what I used to see a lot. So this giant manure pile that turns into like Mount Rainier or Mount Hood, and it starts to take over the whole picture, and it starts managing your place or mismanaging it. And you can imagine in this scenario here that the neighbors don't appreciate it. There's definitely going to be water quality issues that the state could even become involved with. And there's so many better things you could be doing with that land. You could be, you could have additional parking for clients. If it's a business, you could have an outdoor arena, you could have a garden. There's so many wonderful things you could do instead of this. And for the individual horse owner, when we don't pick up manure, manure is composed of fine organic material. And the job in life for fine organic material is actually to absorb moisture and hold it kind of like a sponge. So if we don't pick up manure on a regular basis, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have all that 50 pounds of manure per day in your confinement area, and it's just going to be holding water. And particularly during the rainy season, you're just going to have a terrible mud mess. And so that would be like the bottom picture here. That's what's going on in this cartoon, is that it's just developing more and more mud each day. And in the top, what's happening for horses or any livestock is that they're being re-exposed to parasites, to what we call worms. So the way that worm cycle works is that the adult worms are inside of the intestines of the animal, and the adults shed eggs, and the eggs pass out in the manure. And then once outside, it depends on the species of worm, but some worms, their eggs will hatch as frequently as every 3 days. And then what emerges is a microscopic larva, and that larva crawls around on the ground, and it's like hardwired to crawl up something tall so that it can get re-ingested and the cycle is repeated. So it's going to be more likely that your horse is going to get reinfested with parasites if they're in an overgrazed pasture or confinement area that's heavily covered with manure, and if it's wet too, because that facilitates the movement of the larva. I mean, it makes it easier for them to crawl up that grass, that short grass. So this is another reason why we want to have a manure management plan. And then here's a really big reason why we want to have a manure management plan. In this manure pile, which almost all of these pictures are in Western Washington, because I lived in Western Washington for 30 years. So when you have a manure pile and you're not doing anything good with it, and it gets rained on, you get leachate running off of it. And that leachate is, you know, in essence, it's compost tea, and it's something that managed correctly, it's really useful and beneficial, but not managed, as in this scenario, it's a mess, and that can seep into the groundwater and cause groundwater contamination, or it can run off into creeks, ponds, or ditches, and it can impact aquatic life and riparian life, which is the name for the boundaries around a creek or a water body. So runoff from mismanaged manure piles causes problems. But on the upside, if we manage manure, we can create what I like to call a holistic approach that's going to benefit our pasture plants and our soils, and put it back into a system of recycling and reusing. And then once you have a healthy stand of grass, like what's in this picture here, it actually starts improving the situation, because it helps prevent erosion. It helps utilize the nutrients from urine and manure from the animals. And the healthy roots of the plants hold the soil in place so that you don't get soil erosion when it rains. So one horse produces in the neighborhood of $150 to $300 worth of compost a year. Okay, so all manure management starts with two important points, and we're going to talk about those before we get into my 3 techniques for manure management. So the 2 important points for any manure management program are that you want to pick up the manure regularly, and you want to cover the manure piles. So I recommend picking up manure at least every 3 days, so that you're breaking that parasite reinfestation cycle. You know, the most frequently that parasites can hatch is every 3 days. And so that's why you want to do that. But realistically, it's going to be easiest if you pick up at least once a day. And if you only have 1 horse or a few animals, if you can pick up twice a day, it's actually easier and better, and your place stays cleaner. And covering manure piles, in the beginning, the folks from the Clark Conservation District talked about tarps. And that's what's in this picture here on the bottom right-hand side. So the reason why we cover a manure pile actually has to do with 2 things, with water quality and with moisture control for the compost. A lot of times when we're in person and I ask what people think the purpose is of a tarp, people say it's to hold the heat in. But if you've ever gone on a camping trip and had to use a tarp as a sleeping bag, you'll know that it doesn't do much good for holding heat in, and it does a great job as a vapor barrier. And you'll wake up in the middle of the night freezing cold and all covered in sweat because it won't evaporate. And that's basically what we're doing with the tarp. We're trying to keep our compost from getting too wet in the rainy season or too dried out during the summer. So it's your vapor barrier. Okay, so with those 2 take-home points in mind, let me tell you what I'm going to talk about tonight. So I'm going to talk about 3 manure management techniques for us to consider. And there should be something in each of these 3 for everybody. I'm going to talk about how to compost and how to use that compost on your property. And if you have a really high stocking rate and not a lot of land, or if composting just doesn't sound fun to you, then we're going to talk about some off-site options. And then the third one is I'm going to talk about how to become more chore efficient. So let's start out with composting and how to compost livestock manure. So in this picture here, they have a 2-bin system. They actually use alder shavings, and if you have access to them, I like them a lot. They're green shavings usually. They're not kiln dried or anything. They're basically considered wet because they're still green, but they work quite well and they decompose very well. And they're pretty absorbent as well. So in this system here, what they did is they piled the manure and stall waste from the daily routine on the right-hand side. And when that bin would get full, then they would just close that bin and start using the other bin. And in the picture on the left-hand side, that's finished compost. It's decomposed and they're ready to spread that onto their pastures in the background. So I'm a big fan of composting, and most of our conservation districts and natural resource organizations, I mean, all of them are a fan of composting as well. So let's talk about why we like it so much. First of all, for us as a horse owner or a livestock owner, the compost process is going to kill worm eggs, parasites, pathogens, and weed seeds. It's not going to kill 100%. It's only going to kill, you know, like the majority of them. 100% or something in that neighborhood is going to be what you'd find with commercial composting. So the other advantage is that because it's killing those things, those pathogens, it's going to help reduce the amount of parasite reinfestation that your animals get. And then flies and odors are associated with fresh manure and not with compost. It's also going to reduce the volume of material that you have by about 50%. So if you start out with a pile of manure and stall waste that's 6 feet tall, when it's finished, it's only going to be 3 feet tall, and it's just going to be a whole lot easier to deal with something that's 3 feet tall versus 6 feet tall. And then it's free, easy, and super valuable, the finished compost. Okay, here are the reasons why it's important for composting for our natural resources. So compost and applying compost to our pastures helps improve soil health. And that's because it adds microbes and it adds micro and macronutrients, and those beneficial bacteria and fungal organisms that are in the microbes that I mentioned, they make the soil healthier and healthier, and they bring nutrients down into the soil where your plants can get them. Composting also changes the nitrogen in the manure to a form that's better utilized by plants and less easily washed off by the rain. Compost acts like a slow-acting, time-released fertilizer, and academic research shows us that compost, if you apply it to your pasture, it'll have value out a couple of years, 5 years, and even 10 years in one application of compost. And you just can't get that with a chemical fertilizer. So compost, remember how I said in the beginning that manure is fine organic material and it holds moisture? Well, the same is true with compost. And if you put compost on your pasture, it's going to help your pasture stay greener longer through the summer, and you won't need as much water or irrigation. And there's research, lots of research that shows that compost makes plants healthier, more disease resistant. It makes fruits and vegetables tastier and brighter colored. And then compost and adding compost to your pasture potentially helps in mitigating climate change. And the reason why I say that is because part of what we're expecting with climate change is, longer, drier, hotter summers. And if we've got compost on our pastures, it's going to give us a better chance at holding moisture. And if our pastures are greener and you have more forage production, that's going to be better for climate change because you're going to have more carbon sequestration going on if you've got healthy plants. So hopefully that makes sense to you and gives you lots of good reasons for wanting to compost. So let's explain the compost process. So compost, I like to tell people to think of it as something that's like would grow in your garden, like beans or lettuce. And like beans or lettuce, it's going to need water and it's going to need air. There is an anaerobic composting process, but that's the stinky process. And your neighbors won't be very happy with you if you're anaerobically composting. So that's one of the ways you know that your compost is working is if it doesn't smell bad. If it smells earthy and more like soil, then you're fine. So first of all, starting with the water, you want to, when you're composting, you want to keep your compost as damp as a wrung out sponge. So if you think about it, with a kitchen sponge, if you're going to wipe a counter, you don't want your sponge completely dried out and you don't want it dripping wet because it's not going to absorb anything then. But you want it wrung out and damp, and that's when you can wipe a counter. And that's the same way that you want your compost to be as far as moisture. So your cover or your tarp is for moisture control. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's going to keep your compost from getting too wet in the wintertime and having leachate, that nasty stuff that we were looking at before, from running off of it. And by the way, I might mention or reiterate that that runoff is really all the valuable nutrients that you're trying to save and keep in your compost and then apply back to your pastures. You don't want them to get away and then cause environmental issues. And then the cover also keeps it from getting too dried out. So in the top picture, that's in Western Washington. The bottom picture is here in Idaho. In Western Washington, it's particularly important to tarp or cover in the wintertime. In Idaho, it's a desert where we are. And it's particularly important to cover in the summer when it's super hot. So let's talk about, so I said that compost needs air and water. So we talked about the water. So let's talk about the air. So you want your compost, as I mentioned earlier, you want it to be aerobic. The anaerobic is the stinky process, and we don't want that. So the ways that you can add air to your compost pile, you can turn it with a tractor. You can turn it by hand. Sometimes there's little gadgets you can get that you can kind of turn your compost yourself. Or we have a couple of tricks up our sleeve as far as passive aeration. So you can use PVC pipes, like in this picture, kind of like chimneys. So air is going to percolate in about a couple of feet on its own. And so you're going to be able to get some amount of air around the edges, but it's the center, the dead center where you're not getting air. And so you want to have, if you're going to have PVC pipes, you want to have them aimed towards the center, and air will go through the pipe or around the outside of the pipe. And you could drill holes in the PVC pipe too, if you wanted to. But what Matt's doing in this picture here is he also has a tamping rod. And we have kind of just gone to taking the tamping rod and wriggling it around, wiggling it around so that you get a hole into the compost. And the hole, you know, eventually caves in. But in the meantime, it's adding a little bit of air all the way into the center of the pile. So what you want in order to compost is you want to have your compost heat up to about 130 degrees for 3 days. And that is what you need to kill worm eggs, parasites, pathogens, and most weed seeds. So it's not hard to do that. I always say if you compost, it will happen. Commercial composters strive to have it uniformly 130 degrees or hotter throughout the entire body of their compost. But because we're not commercial composters, you know, only parts of it are going to get up to that heat, probably not the entirety of the thing. So we just need to keep that in mind and give ourselves, you know, cut ourselves some slack. We're not commercial composters, but we can do a pretty darn good job. Okay. I love these little guys. And so they're called your secondary composters, and they are working for you. And when the temperature of your compost drops down to about 90 degrees or less, that's when it's cool enough that you can get the macroinvertebrates, the little insects, to come and move back in. And so these guys move in and they continue to break down the compost and they make it into something nicer and nicer. So your finished compost is going to be dark colored. It's going to be a little more evenly textured and crumbly, kind of like soil. It should be 90 degrees or less in temperature. It takes about 3 to 6 months, depending on how actively you manage the air and the water. And it should look a lot more like dirt and not so much like manure and stall waste. So you can see in the bottom picture, that's our compost bins here. And that's pretty dark. It looks like a big pile of dirt. So let's look at some examples of compost bins. And what you really want to be thinking about is chore efficiency. It's one of my mantras. I've got tip sheets and all sorts of things on chore efficiency. And the reason why is because, you know, we're only human. And if something turns out to be too much work, it's not going to get done. So you want to lay out everything to be as chore efficient as possible. So this was our compost bin in our old place in Maple Valley, Washington. And we could clean the stalls in the barn on either side and the paddocks then on either side and come out the back of the barn. And we could dump down into our compost bin. So we let gravity help us. When you're laying out your compost bins, you want to think about your regulations in your county. And maybe when we get done, one of the conservation district staff might want to talk about what regulations are in place in Clark County. But the general guidelines are you want your compost bins and your manure piles about 100 feet from property lines, from your wellhead, as well as from the high water mark of any creeks, ponds, or wetlands. So here's some examples of bins. And over the years, 30 years, I have seen so many cool designs for compost bins. They can be built with a variety of materials. There's so many creative designs and ideas out there. The one in the upper left, that is basically right on their confinement area. This is their confinement area and their stalls are right over here. So it was quite easy to just clean and get into the compost bin. This one, same way, compost bins are right outside of the barn, and then the pastures were off to our left. They have a little bit of airspace in between each board. That's for some additional passive aeration. And then the one on the right, so she just had 2 horses and her stalls were back here. Her covered round pen is here. She could clean and then use gravity like to help her to dump down into the bins. And then the finished compost would go out into the pastures, which would basically to our left. So here's some going up the scale a little bit. These are kind of the Cadillac designs in compost bins. The upper left hand, let's see, 3 of these are ecology blocks, and the bottom one is poured concrete. And ecology blocks are like Legos, and they fit together, and they work really well. They're inexpensive if you can find them. It's usually like a gravel quarry or a cement yard that would sell them. What makes them expensive is you have to have specialized equipment to deliver them, and they're only going to be useful for you if it's easy access for that equipment to get in and offload them. But here, these are a couple of designs to give you some ideas. The bottom right-hand side is a design that the NRCS, which is the federal agency that partners with conservation districts, that's their design, and the Clark Conservation District probably has access to plans for that kind of a bin. And then when you have a roof on your compost bin, you don't need to use the tarp. So let's take a look at our place and how we did our compost bins. So we have about 10 acres, as I said, in southwestern Idaho. And what you always want to do is think, again, going back to the chore efficiency idea, you want to have your compost bins centrally located so it's easy to clean everything and get the manure and stall waste into your compost bins. And then you want to think of what you're going to do with your finished compost so that it's easy to get your finished compost out of the bins and onto your pastures, or to give it away, or to use it in your yard. So what we did is we pick up all the manure in all of our confinement areas, like these 2, in our paddocks around the main barn, in our round pen, in our guest barn here, as well as in our arenas. And it all goes into our compost bins. And then the finished compost goes out in our pastures. Or if we want to give it away, somebody would drive in our driveway down the farm road to the compost bins. So it's centrally located and fairly chore efficient. So we poured cement. Well, we didn't pour it, but we hired somebody to design and build and pour cement for our bins. And we have a 3-bin system. Generally, 3 bins is what you want, unless you only have 1 or maybe 2 horses. 3 seems to be like the magic number. So you have 1 bin where you're piling the daily manure and stall waste. It gives you flexibility so that you can have another bin that's in the composting process and is just hanging out. And then you have a 3rd bin that's maybe finished compost, and you can apply that to your pastures. The picture on the right-hand side, I wanted to show you because I knew we were going to need some kind of cover, and I wasn't sure how we were going to tie it down. So my contractor took old horseshoes of ours and sunk them into the cement so that we had a place to tie our tarps. And then the bottom picture is our tarp. And I'm like anti-plastic, which is another whole conversation. But, you know, tarps, eventually decompose and just turn into a bunch of shredded plastic. So what we've been experimenting with for probably about 4 or 5 years is using canvas tarps. I mean, they decompose as well, but they do last pretty well. I would say maybe like 3 or 4 years. So that's, the plastic tarps really only last like 1 year. But hopefully, because they're natural material, they'll decompose better. Anyway, it's just a thought to look at some kind of a maybe a little more sustainable solution for the cover. So what to do with your finished compost? There's lots of good things to do with finished compost. You can apply it to pastures and lawns and gardens. We recommend only applying it during the growing season when plants can utilize it. Basically, you just want to apply it in a thin layer, kind of like the picture there. And you want to put down no more than 2 to 3 inches per year in the same place. You never want to put down compost very thickly because it'll smother the grass plants. So you want to put a thin layer down, and you can do that several times a year, but you don't want more than about 2 to 3 inches total per year. So here are some good options for what to do with your finished compost. I love seeing all the different uses of finished compost. We, on our place at Sweet Pepper Ranch, we had a big renovation project. We inherited a big pile of compost, but I was fine with that because there were lots of places on our property where they had used soil sterilants and had nothing growing, and I knew we wanted to put in vegetation. So we used that manure pile from the previous landowner, spreaded it out, and then we seeded by hand, and then that's the grass that we seeded on either side of the round pen there. So how to spread compost. This is a manure spreader that's a PTO manure spreader. So it has a PTO right here, and that's a power takeoff. And that means that you have to hook up the PTO to the tractor, and then the tractor regulates how quickly it throws the compost out. And here's some ground-driven manure spreaders. This is a small one, and then a little bit larger one. And so what that means is that you can't vary the speed of the compost getting thrown out. It just determined by how quickly you're driving. And you need a 4-wheel drive vehicle for that. So we just bought a new manure spreader. The old PTO driven manure spreader, I feel like it's limiting because, well, it's small for one thing, and it's hard to hook and unhook that PTO. I can't do it very well. Matt has to do it. But with this one, it's kind of funny. I should have had a picture of that, but we pull it with our Ford Explorer. It's 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and it makes a great farm vehicle. And then we can load it with a tractor, so we don't have to hook and unhook all the time. So it's much easier. But what is really easy is if you have a neighbor and they can, kind of do like an old barn raising party. So you can have a manure compost spreading party where they bring their tractor and manure spreader over, and then you can load with your tractor and the job gets done really quickly that way. So uses for finished compost, besides using it in your gardens, you can use finished compost as bedding. So what this gal does is she has bedding down, clean bedding, and then she puts the finished compost on top. So compost, as I've been mentioning, is highly absorbent, and it can do a great job as bedding. So my second manure management option is what to do with too much manure. And we'll talk about some cool offsite options. So highlighting by starting with Las Vegas, which you wouldn't think we'd be talking about manure in Las Vegas in the same presentation. But there are horse facilities in Vegas inside these giant hotel casino things that hold thousands of horses, 1,200 horses at this facility for shows. And so 50 pounds a day times 1,200 horses, it's a lot of manure. And what they do is they collect it each day and they take it to a compost facility. So I'll highlight a few options for us tonight. And the first one is the giveaway approach. And it's much easier to rehome compost versus straight manure and stall waste. And compost is just much more attractive. So if you want to give away compost or manure, you might want to consider a sign, and it'll be particularly helpful if you live on a well-traveled road. But there's other ways to think about advertising, like through extension and maybe their Master Gardener program. Any of the tilth programs. Seattle Tilth is one of the biggest tilth organizations in the country. And tilth, it means the health of the soil. So that's an organization that's around soil health, basically, and gardening. Gardening clubs, arboretums, those are all different ideas for ways to give away manure and compost. So I have a success story to share with you about Facebook Marketplace. So I have tried for 3 years. So we only have 6 acres of pasture and we have 12 to 15 horses, plus we have more sometimes with the horse motel. And we can only utilize about the manure and compost from about 12 horses. So we're just teetering on the too much. So I've been working real hard the past couple of years to try to find good offsite options without luck until this year. So when I was listing it on Facebook Marketplace and Nextdoor, I kept getting kicked off because it said it was inappropriate. And I couldn't figure out, I'd read the guidelines and I couldn't figure out what was inappropriate. But this year when I listed it, this is a picture of how I did it. I didn't mention horses and I didn't mention manure. I said excellent quality compost. And under the brand, I said equestrian facility. And then I just said it's high quality. We don't use any chemicals and we use non-GMO hay. And it went like hotcakes. Like it was just crazy how fast, how many phone calls and such that we got. And we sold it, one bin for about $200. We would load it and we charged, I think we just charged $10 to load up a pickup loads worth of compost. So anyway, that's an idea for you, and that's my experience with it. So other places that might take stall waste include compost facilities, plant nurseries, tree farms, crop farms, gardeners, topsoil companies. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention with giving away compost, in Washington State and in other places, the word compost is regulated as well as organic. So you have to be careful or cognizant of what you're claiming to offer. So off-site options may require some kinds of specialized equipment, like you may want to get a dump bed trailer. You may need a bigger tractor. This is a stand that this gentleman had made so that he could push his manure cart up here and then dump down into his manure spreader. Here's some other ideas for storage. So these are at larger commercial facilities. These are all places that have offsite options in place. But they have these ramps so that they can dump into their bins, or here they built a hillside behind their bins so they could come up here and dump down into it. Okay, my last point, and we'll be wrapping it up pretty quickly here in about 5 or 10 minutes. My third manure management point is about chore efficiency, and hopefully there's something in this for everyone. I'm going to talk about rubber mats. I'm a big fan of using rubber stall mats for all stalls, for any kind of livestock. The reason why is that it's a level surface, and that makes it really easy to clean and to just remove the manure and the urine saturated bedding. But it's also good for horse health because it's a flat level surface, which is safer for a horse to stand on when it's flat and even, and it has a certain amount of give to it because it's rubber. And then I suggest to bed, reducing the amount of bed that you use, bedding. Really, the word bedding is a misnomer. It comes from the early years, the time of Black Beauty and all. And in those days, we obviously didn't have rubber stall mats. What they had for flooring was rocks, round rocks, and they were round rocks. And what they wanted was for the urine to drain through the rocks. But those rocks were hard for the horses to stand on. So they actually put straw in there for bedding so that it was easier for the horse to stand on it. But those days are gone. What we use bedding for now is to absorb urine and moisture. They don't need it to sleep in. They've got soft stall mats. So really, we should think of it as like horse litter. And we should just put bedding in the spots where they urinate, or maybe where rain is going to be blowing in. I always encourage people to think about alternative beddings, ones that are going to be really absorbent, and to think about cleaning selectively and having the right equipment. I'll show you some examples of some of those things. So here's rubber stall mats. There's a specific way to put them into your stalls so that they lay flat and don't buckle. Bottom line, you want to use crushed rock and compact it and make sure it's level. And you may not need to use bedding at all. In fact, we don't use bedding. I haven't used bedding in 20 or more years. If a horse happens to have an injury and be confined in a stall, then we use bedding. But horses tend to urinate where it's not going to splash. So they're not going to urinate in a stall. They're going to walk out into their paddock and urinate out there. So you want to choose a bedding product that's going to be absorbent. And really the gold standard in beddings these days is pelleted bedding. And there's a couple of reasons for why pelleted bedding works best. One is like the insert picture on the right, it's easy to store it and you can put it outside, maybe throw a tarp over it in the rainy season. You don't need a dedicated shavings bin like you did in the old days. And then another reason is that it's not going to be dusty like shavings were in the old days, and it's highly absorbent. But many people actually put in the bedding and then they hose it down to fluff it up a little bit so it's easier for the horses to walk and stand on it. And even when they do that, it's still going to be super absorbent. So you also, for chore efficiency, want to have the right equipment, and you want to store it in an easily accessed place. So here's different examples of different kinds of equipment. There's so many different kinds of manure forks these days, but get ones that work, and then store them always in the same place. Here's other examples. So starting on the upper left-hand side, this young lady was 86, I believe, when I took the picture. And she had 8 or 9 ponies, and she cleaned their pens twice a day herself. And the system she set up for herself to make it work was she had a garden cart with dish pans, and then she used dog manure equipment. And she would rake up the manure from the ponies and put it into a dish pan, and then she could dump that dish pan into the compost bin. You know, it wasn't too heavy for her to pick it up. Here's a upper right. Oops, let's go back. Upper right here is a manure cart with a handle. So that might make it easier for you to dump down and then pull the cart back. Bottom left, that's an Ursa. You get them at IKEA, and they're gardening carts, and they are super lightweight and they maneuver real well. And then you can unhook the bed and it'll dump. You know, it's only going to be useful if you have 1 horse or a couple of minis or something like that. And then the bottom left-hand picture is just to remind me and us that manure management is not only our responsibility at home, but it's our responsibility when we're away from home. So at the trailheads, at the horse shows, at the riding facilities, you need to pick up the manure around your trailer from your horses, the spent hay, the bedding, put it back into your horse trailer and take it home for your compost bins. For other livestock, it's particularly easy for alpacas and llamas and goats and sheep, depending on how many of them that you have. But it's easy to pick up their manure because it is pelletized. And I've seen lots of operations where they use the dog manure equipment again, just to rake up the llama manure. Oh, and a sheep there. Yep. A lot of times with cattle, they blade out their confinement areas once or twice a year, and then they just let it accumulate, and then they blade it out with a tractor and a bucket. Another example of chore efficiency is having a ranger or a gator, something like that, and they have dump beds. Super easy to clean your stalls into one of these and then dump that into your compost bins. But the bottom line is that you just want to remove the urine saturated bedding and manure from your stalls when you clean. You don't want to strip your stalls every day. You want to keep that clean bedding in there as long as it's useful. And that will help reduce your manure piles from being a giant mount manure to something that's a little bit more manageable. So don't forget to do something wonderful with all that great compost. You can apply it to your pastures and make your pastures more productive, or you can grow something wonderful for you or for your equine or livestock buddies. And manure management is going to make your places better for you, for your horses, for horse health, for chore efficiency, for the neighborhood, as well as for the planet, because you're going to be helping to do your part to reduce climate change. And that's it. And I have a few resources listed here. I do consulting, as I mentioned. I have an email list and a newsletter and a website with tip sheets, Horses for Clean Water. I'm on social media, Horses for Clean Water, Sweet Pepper Ranch, and Alayne Blickle. I write for the Horse and thehorse.com, and they're like professional journals. They're amazing. And everything that I write is available for free from them as well. And I hope that Sweet Pepper Ranch might be a resource for you someday as a horse motel or stopping point, or maybe for education or cowgirl retreats. So let me know if I can be a resource. So that's it, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Alayne. That was great. So yeah, we have some questions building up in the Q&A and we can start answering those. As a reminder, folks, if you want to submit any questions you have into that Q&A box, now is the time. So, okay. We'll get started with the first one. Let's see. What is the process for moving from bin 1 to bin 2 as it breaks down and then bin 3 as fully composted?
Yeah, you can move it if you want to, or you can just leave it in that bin. Moving it is just a way to aerate it if you have access to a tractor. But for many, many years, we didn't ever move it. We would have a pile and then we would just leave it and let it compost, and we would start a new pile. And let the first pile compost. So those are your options.
Awesome. I'll take the next question. So I think you kind of already answered it, but I just wanted to bring it up. Somebody asked, what do you use to spread compost on pastures? And I'm going to just quickly say that I answered it in the chat, but Clark CD does have a manure spreader. We weren't able to rent it out last year because of COVID and some other stuff, but we are working to get that up for this next year. So if you guys go to our website, you can contact me and also fill out a form to be able to rent that. So do you have anything else to say, Alayne?
Oh, that's so awesome. A lot of conservation districts in Washington have manure spreaders that they rent out. Some are free and some you have to pay a little bit for it. But yeah, that's great that you guys have one.
Awesome. Here's another question. Do I need to pick up manure in the pastures?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad somebody asked that. No, what I recommend is in the pasture, it'd be too much like work to try to pick up manure in the pasture. So what you're going to want to do in the pasture is harrow or drag the manure so that it breaks it up so that your plants can utilize it. You don't want to leave the manure piles because they suffocate the plants and it concentrates all the nutrients in one spot. So you want to drag and break up the manure so that the plants can utilize it.
That's awesome. I know that I was always wondering the answer to that.
Oh, good.
So this one's kind of a tricky question and I'm gonna answer it, and then Alayne, again, sorry, I'm answering some of these questions, but if you have any additional resources, do chime in. But somebody asked, Clark County has more horses than any other Washington county. Spokane County manages a commercial composting operation. Why are we not doing this here? And I will just say from my experience that is a huge need, and we recognize as a conservation district that is a need. And one thing that we are considering doing is a feasibility study, because what we've noticed is it's really expensive to get that type of a anybody that has the capital to bring that forth to do that whole project. And so, you know, if you're a savvy business person, then maybe that's a really great opportunity for you. But like I said, one of the things that we're thinking about doing is some type of feasibility study and seeing what we can do there. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any ideas or if you're interested in kind of pushing us to do that kind of work.
Yeah, there's no conservation districts in Washington that actually manage a compost facility. It is a huge undertaking, but Pierce County has a composting facility where they take all of their solid waste as well as they'll take manure. But yeah, it'd be great if anybody who was listening was interested in composting. There's been so many times and places where people have tried to build composting facilities across Western Washington. I mean, in King County, they have a composting facility too. It was right near our house, actually. where we lived in Maple Valley. So yeah, no, you covered it, Ashley.
Okay, next one. How long in your experience has it taken to break down in terms of months based on volume?
Yeah, so that's a good question as well. It's going to take, depending on how actively you manage the air and the water, it's going to take any place from 2 or 3 months to 6 months. And if you don't manage it at all, it might take a little longer than that to compost. So there's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on your time and if you have equipment available to monitor it and add water and that sort of thing.
Okay, so I know you talked a lot about horses, and there's some other people, people on the call that have other livestock. And so one of the questions was, I have goats and they seem to have a lot less manure than horses. Are there any specific ideas to keep in mind with goats?
It's all the same, really. You want to still pick up the manure, you want to compost, and you want to do something useful with it, because if you don't pick it up, it'll turn into mud, and eventually you'll have more and more mud and less chore efficiency. In some of my other classes, we talk about different footing types for different kinds of livestock, and the footing makes a difference as far as the ease of picking up the manure. So with goats, you may want to think about having sand paddocks, and sheep and llamas as well, unless you're concerned that it's going to get into their fleece. But those are just some options. You want to think about ways to pick up the manure.
Sweet. Okay, next question. This is in regards to tarps versus canvas tarps. The question is, but doesn't the canvas absorb water?
Yeah, it's not perfect. It's more breathable than the plastic tarp. The jury's still out on the deal whether it's working okay or better. It's just what I'm trying right now, because I'm trying to find some way to get around using plastic tarps. Yeah, if anybody wants to experiment with it and let me and your conservation district know, that would be great.
Cool. So we are planning on building a composting system very soon for 35 horses. What size do you recommend? I know that you talked about like the 3 bin system. So, but with that many horses, do you have any additional recommendations?
Well, I would definitely recommend working with your conservation district, and they can probably get you a design. They can do some calculations to tell you how much manure you're going to have and what volume of material. And they can do some designs for you. Ashley or Samantha, you can maybe tell us if there's cost sharing available in your area. So I would start with that. And then what I would say is you're probably going to need more than 3 bins. And what I would recommend is having a pad, cement pad for your finished compost. And then you can kind of stockpile the finished compost onto that pad, because as time goes along, you get more finished compost than probably can get spread. So if you have a place where you can just stockpile the finished compost, that would be great until you can get it either out in your pasture or sold or whatever you're going to do with it. But if you work with the conservation district, not only can they help you with the design, but they can help you with a plan for what to do with your manure when it's finished.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say whoever had that question, if you want to shoot me an email, it's in the chat box. We can discuss it further as far as plans and stuff like that. Here's a question. Is straw bedding also considered a green material? And then on top of that, are there other types of bedding that you would recommend?
Well, I don't know exactly if you mean a green, I think you mean a brown. So straw, because usually you want greens and browns in your compost, and I don't get too wrapped up about that. But what I will mention is that the amount of carbon, which is the brown, so that would be shavings or straw or leaves, the amount of carbon and the amount of nitrogen. So the nitrogen is in the manure in the green part. Nitrogen would be in grass clippings or in food waste as well. And the ratio of carbon to nitrogen as it comes from the horse is about the perfect ratio. It's a little higher in nitrogen with other livestock, which isn't bad. It's just something to note. And the more carbon that you add to it, like the more shavings and bedding that you add to it, the more you're offsetting that. And it's going to take it a little bit longer, make it a little harder for it to compost because it won't have as much nitrogen. So straw is a carbon source and it will compost just fine. It's usually, it has more lignins in it, so sometimes it doesn't break down as well, but it does help with bringing air in because, they're like little straws or little tubules. It brings water in that way, and it'll also bring in air that way. So it has its benefits. It's not bad. It composts nicely.
Can you use compost to fill holes and even out pastures?
Yes, but what you don't want to do is use compost to fill in the wet area on your pasture, because the wet area might potentially be a wet lands, and the compost holds moisture. And so what you're going to be doing is creating, potentially destroying some part of a wetlands and just holding all that moisture there. So that you don't want to do. But yeah, you can use it to fill in, like gopher holes or where there was a stump pulled out, that kind of thing.
Okay, how soon can I plant after I put the manure in my garden spot?
Yeah, there's regulations for that in Washington. And I think it's a year is what they want you to wait before you put it in with food, anything that humans are going to consume. So, and the reason why is not because we know there's anything bad with it. It's mostly because we just don't know everything about manures. But to stay safe, you only want to compost herbivore manure. So you don't want to have dog manure or cat manure or pig manure. Pigs can share pathogens with us. So you don't want any of that in your compost particularly if you're going to use it in your garden. So hopefully that answers it. And Ashley or Samantha, if you know anything more, or if Terry does through extension, on using horse manure in gardens. It does need to be thoroughly composted, and you should wait as long as you can before you use it for human food.
Yeah, I think that about covers it. Like, I mean, our biggest thing is we have a couple of like pig producers. And so that's like one of the big things is like, don't that.
You want to be very careful with pigs. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I tend to use it's kind of a comment, but I tend to use fines, which is like a green damp sawdust without the dust, as it is green. Thoughts on that compared to pellets?
So the fines, are they from deciduous trees or I wonder if, or from like pine or fir? When they're kiln dried, they're going to be, oh, maybe I see the answer, it said pine. You know, there's not like a right or wrong answer. I like the pellets because they're kiln dried and they're super absorbent. But if for some reason you have a system that works for you, as long as it's not dusty or, you know, taking up a lot of room, if it's chore efficient for you and it's composting well, and there's nothing toxic in the bedding product, I think that's great.
Okay, our last question in the Q&A is, do you need a permit to build a simple 3-bin system?
Yeah, one of you guys will have to answer that for for Clark County. I'm not familiar with your county regulations.
I will say that during our 3rd webinar in this series, we are having 2 people from the county come, one
Right.
from County Clean Water, and one is, I think he's like the ag regulator. And so he will be the person to answer that. I do know off the top, like there could be times when building in certain areas, like a floodplain, that for sure you would need permits. But yes, they would be able to answer that better, and it probably depends on the situation.
Yeah, it probably depends on how big the compost bins are. Yeah, even in King County, I don't think that they have to have a permit for compost bins. So I would think not, unless it's really big.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions in our Q&A, and it looks like we just have 1 minute left before 7:30. So I would like to thank everyone for attending, and especially I would like to thank you, Alayne, for taking the time to present for us. So
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here and sharing the good word about manure and manure management. One of my favorite topics.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Alayne, and everyone attending. Please don't forget to fill out our survey after this. So with that, good night, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye.